Quilty is brought to you by APQS, handcrafted quilting machines. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Hovel, when you need to cut it close, choose Hovels. Quiltology, the urban quilt space.
Quilty!
Hi, and welcome to Quilty. On today's episode, we are going to take you through the parts of a sewing machine that you need to be able to recognize to get sewing. There's lots of parts we're not going to cover today. We're just going to go through the fundamentals so you know kind of some basic vocabulary words. Well, every sewing machine is going to be a little bit different from the other, right? There's lots of makers of sewing machines. There are old models, there are new models, there are models of sewing machines that have not even been invented yet. So there are a lot of differences in sewing machines, of course, but they all work with basically the same mechanics. And so on today's show, I want to take you through the different parts of my sewing machine, because the parts that my sewing machine has will be pretty similar to the parts that your sewing machine has, okay? So the first thing that you will need when you have your sewing machine sitting in front of you, you will need some power. Because essentially, a sewing machine is a motorized needle. What you used to do by hand, you now do with a machine, and it's got a lot of power behind it. So you want to get that power going, and you need a power cord. All your sewing machines will have this, unless you've got a factory accident. You will have to plug in your sewing machine, and maybe you think it's silly to say this, but a lot of people sit down at their sewing machine and it won't go, and it's like, what's happening? And it's not turning on. It's because it's not plugged in. So actually, Brian, would you come and plug in?
Surely.
This is Brian. He's going to plug in the sewing machine. Brian, thank you. I like your cap.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Good. We have power. Great. That was Brian. Thanks, Brian. Before you turn on your machine, even though you're all juiced up, you're ready to go, it's got power going to it, you want to plug in your pedal. This sewing machine is a power tool that uses both your hands and your feet. Your foot presses the pedal that makes the motor go, right? So you have to plug in your pedal or you're not going to get very far. Usually the pedal plug-in is on the right side, or maybe it's in the back, and then your pedal, once it's plugged in, goes on the floor at a comfortable position for your foot. You can decide whether you want to put with your, put the pedal to the metal with your right foot or your left foot. It's up to you. I use my right, and then you can turn on your machine. It's awake. You'll know your sewing machine is on usually because some sort of light will come on. So my sewing machine is on, and this is where we're going to begin showing you the different parts, okay? Let's sort of go from right to left. On the right-hand side is the hand wheel. The hand wheel is a manual way. It's a dial. The hand dial is a manual way to raise and lower your needle. And if you can see, as I'm turning the hand wheel, it's going up and down this needle, right? Very good. And while I'm doing that, we'll take a closer look at it a little bit later, but the take-up lever is also going up and down. The take-up lever and the needle are very connected, right? Okay, good. So moving right along, we'll just lift this up because we're going to keep it lifted up because we're going to show you in here now. This is the bobbin winder area. This is the bobbin winder spool. This little mechanism here clicks over, and this piece of metal holds the bobbin in place while it's being wound. And on another episode of Quilty, we're going to show you how to wind a bobbin, so that'll be really clear to you. But when you sew on a sewing machine, you have a lock stitch, and it's two different pieces. The thread goes from the bottom and the top and sort of locks together as it makes the stitch, and that's what makes your fabric stay together. It like locks the different threads. So there's thread on the top and there's thread on the bottom. So the bobbin is wound right about here. Moving along, you have your spool pin and your spool cap. On a lot of machines, the spool pin is like up here and it's just straight up and down. This one is a little bit different. It goes to the side, but this is where your thread goes, and I'll put this thread here so that you can see that's where it pops on. The spool cap goes on top, and that holds things in place. And you want your spool cap to be larger than your spool of thread to make sure it's all snug and secure in there. This part of your machine is kind of I don't want to say it's the brain because the computer is sort of the brain, but this is where the magic happens with your thread. The thread path is from the spool of thread on down to the needle. It's where you're going to be doing the majority of your threading when you start threading your machine. As you follow it down here, you've got your needle, of course. The needle is a sewing machine needle. You can't just take any old hand sewing needle and stick it into the machine. Sewing machines have sewing machine needles that you buy. There are different kinds of needles. We'll talk more about that one day on Quilty. And this is your presser foot. this little guy, and I'm going to let it go here. And I'm going to pick it up and put it in my hand. This is a presser foot. This happens to be a patchwork foot. I love using a patchwork foot on my machine. But this has a 1/4 inch marker on it. And when you're doing patchwork, you always want to sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So this foot shows me it has a little extra guide right there. And that's how I know I'm getting a 1/4 inch seam. You'll see that more when we sew. But to put your presser foot on, you will click it into place. Just like that. And what I'm doing back here, this little lever is the presser foot lever that raises and lowers the presser foot. So it either raises and it'll stay up there, it locks into place. So you can arrange pieces of fabric underneath here. You can, get things underneath, and it gives you some space to work underneath. And when you lower it, it means you're ready to sew. So you always sew with your presser foot down, okay? Like I said, there are many different kinds of sewing machines, and there are many, many parts to a sewing machine. There are thousands of parts. So today, obviously, I've just given you the basics. Just a couple more I want to tell you about. These little teeth under here, underneath the presser foot, those are the feed dogs. I always thought that would be a good name for a band, the feed dogs. And they help move the fabric along. When you do a stitch, if you've ever sewn anything, or if you're about to sew something, you'll see the fabric it wants to move. It moves through. You don't have to really push it through because it's really moving along. The feed dogs help move that fabric along. And then here is your bobbin. And your bobbin in this machine is a top drop bobbin. Top drop, lock it, bobbin. This one goes in from the top like this, and this is your bobbin. Some machines, let me put it in this hand, maybe a little bit easier to see. Some machines have a bobbin that is a front-loading bobbin, and that's a very common way to do it. So you might have a front-loading bobbin. But all machines will have a bobbin and a bobbin case. So we will talk more about threading your machine. We'll talk more about threading a bobbin in an episode of Quilty coming up. I want to talk briefly about this computer screen. The controls that I have here will allow me to adjust the tension. They will allow me to adjust the needle position, and they will allow me to adjust the stitch length. And so, of course, and really the last thing I have to say is if you want to change those things and you want to know anything about your machine, please get your manual and use it. I love my Baby Lock. I really, really love it because it's so approachable and easy to use. But I still go to my manual, and I still take a look at my manual whenever I have a question. When you get a sewing machine, please buy it from a dealer so they can help you when you have questions. And keep flipping through your manual, keep asking questions, keep taking classes, and get to know your sewing machine because it is your best friend and you'll be spending a lot of time with it. So I hope that helped you kind of see the basics of this machine, and hopefully yours too. And keep watching Quilty for more information on how to make some pretty gorgeous things with this little guy. Quilty is brought to you by APQS, handcrafted quilting machines. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Hovel, when you need to cut it close, choose Hovels. Quiltology, the urban quilt space.